As Gerald pointed out earlier, we'll be in Genesis chapter 7. That falls between Genesis 6 and Genesis 8. You are welcome. And so I was trying to think about this chapter and how to kind of change things up a little bit in respects to, we're telling the flood story over a course of 3 weeks, and there's a lot of detail in here. And I was thinking a lot of what we see is sort of a warning. There's a warning. They know something's amiss, right? They watched Noah build an ark for 120 years, so they knew something was up. But yet they still failed to act accordingly, the people in Noah's day. And I was reminded of the what's called the stupid motorist law here in Arizona. Yes, that is the state of which we live in, the culture where, yes, somebody named it this, obviously nicknamed it, but yes, that is what it's known as, this stupid motorist law. If you're not familiar with it, it basically states this, that any driver who ignores physical barricades or warning signs to enter a flooded road, then needs to be rescued, can be billed up to $2,000 for the cost of the emergency response. Of course, that means nobody ever falls into this trap. There's never an issue. Obviously, we know that's false because what happens every single monsoon season, some bonehead, hopefully none of you are in this room, some bonehead decides they're going to go through into this flooded area, even though the signs clearly say, do not enter when flooded. Yet they still do it. They still get on the news. They become part of the statistic, and the story continues every single year. You think about it, what a waste of time, resources, money, all of these things, just because they fail to follow these warning signs. And don't we do the same thing in our lives? We fail to follow these warning signs. We've seen it. It's all through the scriptures. We've read these stories. Paul himself told the Corinthians, these things have been preserved so you learn from them and don't make the same mistakes. And guess what we do? We make the same mistakes. And yes, I am including myself in that. So last week, of course, we returned to the book of Genesis. We started in Genesis chapter 6, and we were exploring this flood and trying to make it relevant for today. How do we apply this flood account to today? And one of the things that we spoke through, and I mentioned it a moment ago, that we know that this occurred over a period of 120 years of Noah being called to make this and to build this ark. And the word ark is an interesting one. It's actually used obviously in the flood account, but it's actually later used to describe that little basket that baby Moses was in when they were trying to save his life. Did you guys know that? It's that same word. So I always thought that was a thing. That's not even in my notes. That's a freebie, you guys. So obviously, again, there's plenty of time for these individuals to hear this warning that Noah had effectively done. Here was our main idea from last week. It was, I can live through this wickedness, because we saw the example of all the wickedness that was occurring in the world during that time, where God basically audibly put out this sigh of oh, I'm so disappointed in my people, and this is what I'm going to do to fix it. I'm going to wipe everybody clean. And in many ways, what we're going to do is concentrate on those last two words of that main idea from last week, with God. That's what we're going to kind of focus on this morning, because that's really what we're going to see in this account. We're going to see how being with God is going to save these individuals, Noah and his family, and all the animals that he brought along, from this destruction. And what we also see here is there's a large foreshadowing of Jesus that's found in the ark, and I think that's done purposefully. There's a large foreshadow of Jesus and what really being with God means, and how we can apply that directly to the Savior. So keep that in mind as we read chapter 7 of Genesis, and keep that in mind as we go through our time this morning. So here's what we read in Genesis 7. I'm reading for the ESV. You can follow along on the screen, on your device, or in your physical Bibles. Here's what the word says. Verse 1, Then the Lord said to Noah, Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate. And 7 pairs of the birds in the heavens also, male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives were with him and went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood, of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground. 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark, they and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those who entered, male and female, of all the flesh, they went in as God commanded them, and the Lord shut them in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed, and they increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains were under the whole heaven were covered. And the waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all the flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, and all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils were the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him on the ark, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. In our kids' classes, sometimes we'll do like memory verses. So your memory verse for this week is Genesis 7, 1 through 24. Okay, good. So as we read this account, as we reflect on it, obviously it's not hard to see that the ark was the only place that was going to keep Noah and his family and these animals safe. Period. It's very clear, and then that's the picture that we see here. So I think another way to say it is going to be communicated in our main idea this morning, which is this, that the safest place to be is with God and the salvation that he provides. That's the safest place for you and I to be as we go through this wicked earth and this wicked world that we were introduced to just last week, as we read this account even this week. The safest place to be is with God and the salvation that he provides. The salvation that he provided for Noah and his family, of course, was this ark. I've shared this before, but there's a pastor, a theologian, a philosopher, an author, an all-around good guy. His name is R.C. Sproul. Some of you may be familiar with him. And he once was speaking at a college campus, and was talking about salvation and the story of salvation and being saved and what that meant. And as he's walking through, I think he described it as the quad. As he's walking through the quad, a student chases him down. RC, do you know? I have a question for you. He said, yes. He's like, do you know what you're saved from? And RC said, yeah, God. And that's really what we see if you think about it. And if you look at the entire picture of salvation, that's really it. Why we're saved from God's judgment. We're saved from God's wrath. We're saved from God's eternal punishment for our sin. That sin that separates us from him. That sin that we did that marks us as sinners, not worthy to be in his presence. We're saved from God when we're saved. And he provided that salvation, which is the interesting part if you think about it. So through this death and destruction that surrounded everybody that was left on the earth, these individuals, Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives, were kept safe because they were with God. And that's really what that very first word and that first verse in our chapter this morning identifies. It's a really interesting thing. Obviously, the word says this, that then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark. Here's what's interesting about that word go. The King James and the New King James, they use the word come. ESV and other newer translations use go. The reason it's interesting is actually the word come, C-O-M-E, is the more realistic and the better translated word. So the implication there is God, if you picture this, God is in the ark and he's saying, come into the ark. There's this invitation that God's actually providing. He says, come. Not necessarily go, he says, come. Come into my presence where I am. I'm in this place. Come to me. So God was inviting Noah and his family into a place of shelter and safety. And Noah and his family had to be obedient to that. And we talked about that a lot just last week. And the ark itself, actually, I think I even heard somebody earlier call it a boat. Technically speaking, the ark was not a boat, it was a vessel. It was a vessel to keep people safe. It was a vessel to effectively transport. As far as I know, nothing in the Bible, as far as I know, indicates that there was like rotors and steering mechanisms and things like that. And even our text today gives us that idea is when these waters came up, it was moved, the boat was moved from place to place and effectively catapulted to the top so it can be safe. So it was just a vessel that was used to save. And it wasn't more as much as the vessel itself, but again, this invitation of God saying, come into the ark. This means that he's like, no, you come with me and I will provide you safety. And that's what we see when they're in this ark and all these animals they're in. They're with God, so they are safe. So the ark is, and will always continue to be, a foreshadowing of Jesus. Because when we enter into his presence, when we enter into him, that's when we're safe. And that's when we're saved from the eternal destruction that is found elsewhere. So when we're with him, and that's really what I want to talk about for the remaining part of our morning here for the next 3 hours or so, is how the ark foreshadows Jesus. I got to say that once in a while just to make sure you're still listening. So how does the ark foreshadow Jesus? And we're going to give you 3 ways that happens. The first 5 verses tell us that Jesus calls us to salvation. I'm going to start with the easy one, the more obvious one that we see here in this passage. And again, we already talked about verse 1 where this invitation from God is given to Noah and his family. Last week we talked a lot about Noah's obedience and how he was obedient, and we see that, of course, in verse 5 of our passage this morning. But that obedience, if you recall from last week, is a direct sign of his faith. His obedience and our obedience is a huge, and that's the mark of his faith, is when he's obedient to our Savior, to our God. So not only do we see Noah and his family's obedience in, of course, verse 5, but in those preceding verses we see that the obedience even of the animals, which is, if you think about it, not an easy task to control an animal, right? But God made these animals come to the ark. Noah and his family didn't have to go out there and get them. They actually came, and we actually saw this last week. Verse 20 of chapter 6 last week says this, of all the birds according to their kinds, and the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind, 2 of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive. God directed these animals to go to this ark, to go to Noah, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. Maybe I'm alone in that. That's okay. Here's what it reveals about God. God's in complete control, and God is all-powerful. Think about it, too. That means lions and tigers and bears. Thank you. 1 or 2 of you. Appreciate it. Right? That means all of these went together to this ark without eating each other, without hurting each other, without devouring one another. God controlled every single one of them. Say it another way, God alone has the power to bring everybody and everything together. And of course, we know our politicians try to do it all the time. Activists try to do it all the time. And guess what? They fail every time and many times. God's the only one who can bring a bunch of misfits like you and me, respectfully, together under Jesus. And that's a beauty, isn't it? All colors and creeds, all ages, all nationalities and backgrounds, guys like me from LA, can all be one in Jesus Christ. And he's the only one who has the power to do that. I also want to draw your attention to verse 16 of last week's passage in chapter 6. And I think this was a really fascinating thing too. This is what he says in verse 16 of chapter 6. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above and set the door of the ark in its side. Door, singular. There's only one door. Tell me that's not a picture of Jesus. And here's a really neat thing. Elizabeth and I, a couple years ago, went to the Ark exhibit in Kentucky. You can throw the next slide up there, boys. There it is. Probably hard to see, but on the top there is a giant door. There's like a lit up cross is projected on that door, and it's to represent that, hey, you know what, guess what? This was the only way to salvation for these animals. It's the only way of salvation for Noah and his family. They all had to go through this one singular door, just like Jesus. The only way to salvation is through Jesus Christ. Just like the ark, the only way to get into that ark is by this one door. And there again, this is a picture of Jesus here. Every person and creature who were saved had to enter through that one door. Every person and creature every person will be saved has to enter through Jesus. And that's the picture we see here in this ark. And of course, all that began when God himself in verse 1 said, come. This invitation. And he's inviting each and every one of us, each and every day that we're still alive and still kicking. And this invitation is first introduced here. This idea of salvation through the ark is first introduced here. And it carries this thematic invitation throughout the entire scriptures, taking us all the way to Revelation chapter 22. There's invitations all throughout the scriptures. He gives us that final invitation in chapter 22 of Revelation, which of course is the foreshadowing and the prophecy that we understand as it relates to the end of the earth as we know it. We've all been invited to come to the Father for salvation. And that's what this ark represents for us today. Next thing we see here is this, that Jesus saves us from eternal judgment. So that's what he saves us from this eternal judgment. Verse 10 tells us this, that after 7 days the water of the flood came down upon the earth. So guess what? Immediately we see this prophecy fulfilled. The Bible prophesied that this was going to happen back in chapter 6, verses 7, 13, and 17. Just a few seconds ago in chapter 7, verse 4, he predicted that the waters would come down, and it happened. When we see these things occur in the scriptures, we have to be reminded that God always does what he says he's going to do. So when we are still waiting for him to do something, that doesn't mean it's not true. It just means he hasn't done it just yet. A lot of these promises you find in the Bible are actually spoken about in present tense, effectively saying, the writer is basically saying, this has already happened, but it hasn't happened just yet. That's a faith component there where he's like, I know this is going to occur, so I'm going to speak about it as if it's happening now, even though I know it's going to happen. That's a faith component that we see there. God's going to do what he says he's going to do. And that's what we see as well. So this storm I thought was interesting too. This storm, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but there's a uniqueness, of course, to this storm. Of course, one of the hints we see is later on where God gives this promise that he's not going to do this again. That beautiful promise in Genesis chapter 9, verse 11, where we understand what the rainbow really means. That's the promise he gave, and that's the promise he gives us, and the sign that he gives us. So we obviously see that part, but also verse 11 gives us a hint. It says, in 600 year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, here's the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heaven were opened. Full disclosure, I'm not a meteorologist, I'm not a scientist. But what I understand that to mean is that the floodwaters came from below and from above. I don't know about you, but I haven't seen that happen before. But you think about the impact of this flood that killed all living creatures on the earth, it had to have been a big flood. And it had to have been massive and powerful. And that's what we see there. It means that it came up from below and from above and destroyed everything in its sight, and guided this giant ark and kept it safe and kept everybody on board safe. And what follows, of course, in verses 17 through 24, when we read this account, we see that there's just utter destruction and death, and it's really a sad account. But here's the beauty of it. God never leaves us without hope when he shares these stories and this history with us. Verses 15 and 16 is where we see that hope. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was breath of life. And those who entered, male and female, of all flesh, went in as God had commanded, and the Lord shut them in. There's 2 things in those verses I wanted to point out. First thing is that he uses the phrase breath of life. He kept them alive. He gave them life by being with him in that ark. And the other one, this is one of my favorites I saw this week, is that God shut them in. In verse 16, it says that God shut them in. God sealed the door to keep them safe from the elements outside. He did that. Noah didn't go over there and hit the clicker on the garage and the garage door closed. He didn't walk over there and close it and make sure it was locked. Put the chain on the door and all that. God shut them in. God shut them in. So as we enter into Jesus, just like those who entered into the ark, God promises us safety and salvation from this eternal judgment. And who's the one who keeps us in and shuts us in? It's him. God shuts us in. He's the one who keeps us safe. He's the one who does the work. We just have to be obedient. He's the one who does the work. And then lastly, we see this, that Jesus gives us security. Once again, we see this insane picture of all of this destruction, but those who were in the boat, this ark, this vessel, were kept safe. God gives us that security in the place in which he had given us that salvation. So when that flood came, if you look at the account, there's no indication that Noah was afraid. Pam prayed about fear this morning. Right? There was no indication that he was afraid or he was doubtful of what God was about to do. There was no indication that as these animals were coming onto the ark, those 7 days between when God said, hey, get on the ark, I'm going to bring the waters down in 7 days. There's no indication of doubt or fear or anxiety or anything from Noah and his family. We don't have a record of that. It could have happened, but we don't see it. So again, he had to act in faith. He trusted God, and he trusted this vessel, this place of salvation that God provided for him, and that got him through this destruction. That got him through this significant issue. And again, we see the destruction in those final verses in this chapter. And again, the language, I mentioned this earlier, the language, it describes this absolute terror of an event. And what's really interesting in it, there's a word in there that stands out in verse 18 and 24, and it's the word prevailed, as the ESV has it listed. And that word, this is what that word means. It's overwhelmingly mighty. And one author said it suggests that the waters were stronger than the earth. Again, very powerful storm. And here is what creation scientists think about when they read this account and they see what kind of destruction happened. One, they see that the form of the earth was likely changed forever because of the result of this flood. And the other thing that they point out is when we talk about fossilization and these rock formations, they're saying it's likely a result of these powerful floodwaters that happened so rapidly with so much power and force. That's what caused these things to occur. Not tens of millions and millions and millions and billions of years of formation. They're saying this water was so powerful, this storm was so powerful, this is what resulted. That's a lot of what they think about. So those, again, were on the ark, were kept safe. And if you think about this ark, it was a giant wooden vessel. That alone shows you how much God was involved. In our brains, we throw a wooden boat in a giant storm, it likely isn't going to last very long. But this one was built by God. This one was built for a purpose of salvation. If the ark is a picture of Jesus, which I firmly believe that it is, then we can conclude that Jesus keeps us safe, again, from God's final judgment that is promised to come. And that's exactly what we see with Noah and his family. So this is what we said earlier in our main idea. The safest place to be is with God and the salvation that he provides. Are you safe? Are you safe from this judgment that is still to come? These 120 years that he's given us, so to speak, are done. They're over. The ark's been built. The salvation is available for us in Jesus. So when Jesus came, he invited us to come to him. And he's doing that even to this very day. He continues that until all who are called and all of these animals that were called to the ark to enter, all the families, that door was not shut until God was ready for it to shut. So he hasn't returned just yet. That just means there's more people to be saved. That means there's more people to be saved. And when he's called every single one of his creatures, that'd be you and me now, home, salvation in his son Jesus, that's when he's going to shut us in, and he's going to anchor us home. Keep us safe from that final judgment. So are you safely on the ark? Are you safely in Jesus? Let's pray. Father, thank you for the salvation that you provide in Jesus Christ. Thank you for this incredible historical picture that you provided in the ark that helps us to understand what this really looks like, to help us to see that you have given us a place of salvation that you have called each and every one of us to. And for those of us who have entered that salvation, we're so grateful. But use us, Father, to help others to enter that as well. Give us the opportunities, give us the words, give us the courage, give us the hope, give us the faith. Because we know you are able, and we know that you provide the strength, the power, the abilities, and let us be obedient to those calls. And even that obedience is a gift from you. And we acknowledge that as well. So we thank you, Father, for giving us your Son Jesus, the only place of salvation, the only person who could grant us entry into your kingdom. And we thank you for that in his holy name. Amen.